Namaste, and welcome to our continuing series on the life divine with our beloved Ranga. We are on page 56 in the chapter Knowledge by Identity and Separative Knowledge. And we begin with the line, "But when the subject draws a little back from itself."
So, as usual, we will see what he has said in the previous para and we will start reading this one. Basically, in this chapter, he is telling us that there are 4 types of knowledge. At the lowest level, indirect separative knowledge. I don't know you except if my senses are giving me data of you. So it is the senses are coming in between the subject and the object, and also you are separate from me. So it is separative indirect knowledge. The next level is direct. I don't use senses. I go either in the subliminal or in the spiritual planes of consciousness, and I can see directly with subtle eyes and subtle ears. I can sense the object outside me, but it is still outside me. That means to say it is direct but separative knowledge. I know you, your thoughts are your thoughts, not mine. But at the highest level, your thoughts and my thoughts are all inside me. So that's knowledge by identity. And there is a third one, which is the third level is knowledge by identity in a slightly diminished form. Okay? So this is what he is telling, and he is examining all these things. So at the highest level, subject and object become one. So there is no need of knowledge. Knowledge is that which links the knower to the known. So if they are one, then there is no need to know. Now, I'll read the summary, very short summary of what he has said earlier. Apart from the knowledge by identity, the spirit allows itself 2 other modes of consciousness without losing its essential identity. 1. Inclusion, the one in the many. The one in the many is a cosmic consciousness in which I find myself to be everywhere. The self, myself, is the self of everybody else. That is inclusion. Then there is, that's a many in the one. Everybody is in me, the cosmic consciousness. Okay? And the other one is the indwelling. I see myself in everybody, that is indwelling, penetration. My consciousness penetrates into yours and finds it the same. Okay? So, this is made possible without loss of initial fundamental identity. The spirit knows all because it is all, and the identity is repeated for existence, consciousness, power and bliss. What is true for consciousness is also true for power, is also true for bliss. In other words, it means my power, what I feel it to be separate from yours, I find there is the same power acting in you and in me. The same bliss that is acting in you and me. So that the identity is repeated for, as he says, existence, consciousness, power and bliss. Then here, there is no need of any effort. In the physical world, I have to make an effort to know the other, then not me, I have to know. But there is no effort, it's automatic. There is no effort needed at all. There is no knowledge, there is no effort. Everything is within me. So, yet it may be said that the beginning and the source of phenomena of knowledge. So this is verse 6 and 7. Yet it may be said that the beginning and the source of the phenomenon of knowledge starts here without loss of identity. In other words, at that height, the knower, the subject, is looking at the object which is part of himself. But by some distancing, it sees the object as something separate from the subject. So Chit, consciousness, looks at its own power. So this is the beginning of the separation.
Yeah, we saw this last night in Savitri, Book 2, Canto 14, when he discusses this very thing. Huh? Yeah.
So at that level, there is separation and yet there is no separation.
Yes.
You can say that. Now we read what we read last time, but we are going to look into it in detail. I'll read each sentence. But when the subject draws a little back from itself as object, then certain tertiary powers of spiritual knowledge, of knowledge by identity, take their first origin, which are the sources of our normal modes of knowledge. So when the self looks at its own power, consciousness is looking at its own power and telling it to create forms, that's the beginning of the separation. And at the lowest level, the separation is complete. You are separate, I am separate, this computer is separate, everything is separate. No sense of unity and oneness. The oneness starts at the spiritual level of consciousness, level 2. Okay, so but when the subject draws a little back from itself as object, then certain tertiary powers of spiritual knowledge, of knowledge by identity, take their first origin, which are the sources of our normal modes of knowledge. Our normal modes of knowledge are sense knowledge, which is separative, indirect. Okay, so it is starting at that level, the separation. There is a spiritual intimate vision, a spiritual pervasive entry and penetration, a spiritual feeling in which one sees all as oneself, feels all as oneself, contacts all as oneself. We'll look at this sentence carefully. There is a spiritual intimate vision, a spiritual pervasive entry and penetration. In other words, when I am looking at everything in the physical world, I am entering into each thing and finding that it is the same as me. Penetration and pervasiveness is going everywhere. It's another way of speaking of the cosmic consciousness. And penetration. The second one, a spiritual feeling in which one sees all as oneself. I am seeing everything, but it's really myself only, in form separate but essentially the same. Okay? There is a power of spiritual perception of the object and all that it contains or is perceived in an enveloping and pervading identity, the identity itself constituting the perception. So, there is the knowledge by identity he is talking about. There is a power of spiritual perception of the object, spiritual perception of the object, and all that it contains or is. So, because it's part of myself, I know what it is and what it contains. Okay, so feels all as oneself, contacts all as oneself. There is a power of spiritual perception of the object and all that it contains or is, perceived in an enveloping and pervading identity. Pervading and enveloping is inclusive. Everything is within me. Okay. There is a spiritual conception that is the original substance of thought, not the thought that discovers the unknown, but that which brings out the intrinsically known from oneself and places it in self-space in an extended being of self-awareness as an object of conceptual self-knowledge. So, he is going into great detail to explain, and is using words which are a little, but it's very simple actually. There is a spiritual conception that is the original substance of thought. The thought has a substance, okay? That thought, not the thought that discovers the unknown, which is our thought. Our thought is I am discovering the unknown, but there it's not discovering the unknown, it is looking at itself as though it is something separate. That's what he's saying. Enveloping and pervading the identity itself constituting the perception. The perception is really, it's a wrong word to use because I am seeing myself. But that myself is something, I am willing it to be separate. Like that. Okay, so there is a spiritual conception that is the original substance of thought, not the thought that discovers the unknown, but that which brings out the intrinsically known from oneself and places it in self-space in an extended being of self-awareness. All knowledge is within me, but I am bringing it out and looking at it within myself. This is the experience of the highest levels. Okay? And places it in self-space, not normal space. It is self-space within yourself, in an extended being of self-awareness as an object of conceptual self-knowledge. Okay. So, although object and subject are same, yet you can consider it and begin to see it as something other than myself, but within myself. Okay, so, as an object conception. There is a spiritual emotion. He is talking of thought, emotion, substance, existence, consciousness, bliss. Okay, Shakti and bliss. There is a spiritual emotion, a spiritual sense. There is an intermingling of oneness with oneness, of being with being, of consciousness with consciousness, of delight of being with delight of being. What he is saying is that this subject and object becoming one applies to substance, to consciousness, to power as well as bliss. That's what he's saying. It's not only consciousness. My power is your power. Okay, that's what he's saying. There is a joy of intimate separateness in identity. There is a joy of intimate separateness in identity. This is why in India we have the Vedantic knowledge is threefold. One is, my soul is essentially the same as the divine soul. This is the Vedanta, it's the Advaita. There is no two, there is only one. There is a Shankaran philosophy, Shankara. But there is Ramanuja, 400 years before our time, 400, 500 years. So he experienced this. He experienced that I am the one with him, and yet I can have a relation with the divine. I am the same as the divine, and yet I can have a relation with the divine, which logically is impossible. How can you be the same with somebody and yet have a relation? That's what is meaning by subject and object in the same space. And there is a third experience, which is Dvaita. Dvaita means twofold. The individual soul can never become the divine soul. It can have a relation with the divine soul. That's a Dvaita philosophy, and there are several. Madhvacharya is one, and I think also there are others also.
It applies in Christianity also.
Yes. In Christianity it is only separateness.
Yes, exactly.
There is no union possible. It is blasphemy to say that you can be the divine.
Right, right.
You can't say that. So it is
but you can have a relation.
Yeah, you can have a relation with the divine. You can experience joy. You can experience emotion. But you can't become the divine. How can it be the Christians say, you are so imperfect. How can you be one with the perfect? But in the Indian philosophy, it is the essence of you, which is the same as the divine. The essence of you, not the body-mind life. Somebody had asked Mahatma Gandhi, and he said similar thing. He said that you can't become the divine, but you can experience him and you can have a relation with him. So somebody asked Sri Aurobindo whether what he is saying is right or wrong. So Sri Aurobindo said, if Gandhi meant that the essential human soul can become one with the divine, he is right. But you cannot become the divine with your body-mind life. That's not possible. Because this is, in that sense, the Christians are right. Okay, then the body-mind life is too imperfect. So it cannot. It will be possible when the supramental race comes in. Then matter also will become spiritualized. So there are all these different ideas, and Sri is putting them all and showing the truth of each one. Okay, so there is a joy of intimate separateness in identity, of relations of love, joined with love in a supreme unity. So, love joining with love in a supreme unity, that also is possible at that level. Our logic belongs to the lower spheres of knowledge, but at the higher spheres of knowledge, logic fails. You have to go beyond logic. Logic is rigid.
Yes.
And analytical. But the real knowledge is not analytical, it is synthetic. It can see oneness and also see separateness together. So that's what is being said. There is a joy of intimate separateness in identity, of relations of love, joined with love in a supreme unity, a delight of the many powers, truths, beings, of the eternal oneness, of the forms of the formless. All the play of the becoming in the being founds its self-expression upon these powers of the consciousness of the spirit. So, in the becoming, in the physical world here, it all starts by the unity of consciousness, existence, power and bliss. But they come here and they become separated, but that's the origin of all these things. Okay. But in their spiritual origin, all these powers are essential, not instrumental, not organized, devised or created. So, let's understand what he's saying by this. Are essential. It's like the seed which is essential, but the seed does not contain the instrumental or organized or devised or created. The seed does not contain the fruits, flowers, branches, twigs, roots. It does not contain. It's a unorganized oneness. But when it becomes organized and created, leaves, flowers, details can come in. But that unity is a amorphous, formless unity. That's what he's saying. The idea of the seed and the tree is very clear. The same thing applying here. Okay, so but in the spiritual origin, all these powers are essential, not instrumental, not organized, devised or created. They are the luminous, self-aware substance of the spiritual identical, made active on itself and in itself. Spirit made sight, spirit vibrant with feeling, spirit self-luminous as perception and conception. All is, in fact, the knowledge by identity, self-powered, self-moving in its multitudinous selfhood of one awareness. At our level, we are seeing multiplicity. But as you keep going up, multiplicity becomes less and less and less, and you start seeing oneness. But it is possible to see with that divine consciousness here the multiplicity as well as the unity. That is what Sri Aurobindo wants. The others, the Advaitins and the Advaita philosophy, they say that all the multiplicity is limitation. So we should have only the total oneness. So you go there, that's the real thing. But Sri Aurobindo says, no, that oneness is possible here also. Because then there is wealth, variety, richness with the multiplicity. In the one which is only one, in a way of speaking, it can be boring. It can be no variety, in a way of speaking. Okay, so this is what you have to experience the divine here. That's what Sri Aurobindo wants. The others are very content with that oneness, featureless oneness. Okay, so the spirit's infinite self-experience moves between sheer identity and a multiple identity, a delight of intimately differentiated oneness and an absorbed self-rapture. So, the spirit infinite self-experience moves between sheer identity, only oneness, and a multiple identity. Multiple identity at our level, but if you are in a cosmic consciousness, you are one with everybody and everybody else is also one with you. So that's, and then you get a rapture, a self-rapture. Okay, we go to the next para.
Yes.
A separated knowledge arises when the sense of differentiation overpowers the sense of identity. The self still cognizes its identity with the object, but pushes to its extreme the play of intimate separateness. We'll read the whole para first. At first, there is not a sense of self and not self, but only of self and other self. A certain knowledge of identity, and by identity is still there, but it tends to be first overstructured, then submerged, then so replaced by knowledge through interchange and contact that it figures as a secondary awareness, as if it were a result and no longer the cause of the mutual contact. The still pervasive and enveloping touch, the interpenetrating intimacy of the separate selves. Interpenetrating intimacy of the separate self. Finally, identity disappears behind the veil, and there is the play of being with other beings, consciousness with other consciousness. And underlying identity is still there, but it is not experienced. Its place is taken by a direct seizing and penetrating contact, intermingling, interchange. It is by this interaction that a more or less intimate knowledge, mutual awareness, or awareness of the object remains possible. There is no feeling of self meeting self, but there is a mutuality. There is not yet an entire separateness, a complete otherness and ignorance. This is a diminished consciousness, but it retains some power of the original knowledge, curtailed by division, by the loss of its primal and essential completeness, operating by division, affecting closeness but not oneness. The power of inclusion of the object in the consciousness of an enveloping awareness and knowledge is there, but it is the inclusion of a now externalized existence which has to be made an element of ourself by an attained or recovered knowledge, by a dwelling of consciousness upon the object, a concentration, a taking possession of it as part of the existence. The power of penetration is there, but it has no natural pervasiveness and does not lead to identity. It gathers what it can, takes what is thus acquired, and carries the contents of the object of knowledge to the subject. There can still be a direct and penetrating contact of consciousness with consciousness, creating a vivid and intimate knowledge, but it is confined to the points or to the extent of the contact. There is still a direct sense, consciousness sight, consciousness feeling, which can see and feel what is within the object as well as its outside and surface. There is still a mutual penetration and interchange between being and being, between consciousness and consciousness, waves of thought, of feeling, of energy of all kinds, which may be a movement of sympathy and union or of opposition and struggle. There can be an attempt at unification by possession of others or through one's own acceptance of possession by other consciousness or other being, or there can be a push towards union by reciprocal inclusion, pervasion, mutual possession. Of all this action and interaction, the knower by direct contact is aware, and it is on this basis that he arranges his relations with the world around him. This is the origin of knowledge by direct contact of consciousness with its object, which is normal to our inner being, but foreign or only imperfectly known to our surface nature. So, this description is of the intraconscient or the spiritual planes of consciousness, direct separative knowledge. This is the whole. It is very. He has gone into great detail. All sorts of possible experiences are possible. So I'll do one thing. I'll read the summary, because sometimes we get confused with the words. So I just read the summary of what he is saying here. So the first type of knowledge is identity. Now the first from the top, sorry. So the fourth is identity. Now the third, okay. The third type of knowledge is direct separative knowledge. Oh, the third. The first is the identity. The second is the knowledge by identity reduced and diminished a little. The third type now he is describing. Third type of knowledge is direct separative knowledge. I can see directly without senses, I can see your thoughts and your emotions. And I know what it is. But it is yours, not mine. Direct separative knowledge. When subject and object drift sufficiently apart so that the difference between the two is pronounced, we have the third way of knowledge, separative but direct. Subtle senses are used, but not the gross senses. Very clear. Okay? So, identity is still present, but it is first overcoated, then submerged, and finally replaced by separation. At last, identity no longer exists, and subject and object become separate. Yet, direct penetration of object by subject takes place, and contents of object are revealed to the subject. Intimate oneness no longer exists. There is the experience of psychics. All psychics, they will touch an object, and then they'll know who owned it and what it has been used for. All these things they will know. So direct separative knowledge. Okay. Mother will look at you, and she doesn't need to use identity, but even the direct separative knowledge is enough for her. She will look into you and see what is your condition, and then give you exactly what is needed. Okay. You and I can't do that. We only look at the surface. So we are not capable of that. But if you go to the spiritual plane of consciousness or the intraconscient, you can do that. You can sense the other person's feelings and thoughts. Okay. Yet identity is still present, but overcoated, then submerged, and finally replaced by separation. There are grades. First of all, there is an identity. Secondly, it is slightly less, and finally identity disappears and it becomes your thought and not my thought. Okay? Yet direct penetration of object by subject takes place, and contents of objects are revealed to the subject. Intimate oneness no longer exists, but a sense of mutuality, connectedness remains. Power of inclusion and penetration are present, but it is no longer within oneself. Object is now external to subject. The third level of knowledge. Okay? This direct separative knowledge is the normal cognition of our subliminal being, but almost unknown to the external nature of body, mind, life. So if you have the power to go into your intraconscient, the subliminal, you have this power of direct separative knowledge. You can call it intuition, but Srimad is going into great detail to explain the nature of that knowledge. Okay, so the direct separative knowledge is a normal cognition of our subliminal being, but almost unknown to the external nature of body, mind, life. So, now if you want, we'll try to go sentence by sentence and see what you say. It's not very easy. We have to consider it a lot. A separative knowledge arises when the sense of differentiation overpowers the sense of identity. Easy, not difficult to understand. First of all, object and subject are one. At a slightly lower level, separative knowledge starts. The object starts becoming other than the subject.
So it's the sense of differentiation.
Yes, that's right.
Exactly.
The sense of differentiation.
Why does it happen?
Why does it happen? Because of the law of the one becoming the many.
Okay. So it's
The
yes.
splitting starts.
Yes.
And the splitting starts at the overmind level.
At the overmind
Yeah.
level.
Okay, so a separative knowledge arises when the sense of differentiation, differences between subject and object, overpowers the sense of identity. Look at that. The lower is overpowering the other one. The self still cognizes its identity with the object, but pushes to its extreme the play of intimate separateness. Your thoughts I can understand intimately, but they are your thoughts, not mine. Okay, so intimate separateness. At our level, the separateness is not intimate at all. Totally separate. No sense of intimacy. At first, there is not a sense of self and not self. That means to say, there is.
At first.
Yeah, at first. At first, because you are nearer to the knowledge by identity. You are nearer to that. But when slightly down, that sense of separateness comes in. So at first, there is not a sense of self and not self. And only of self and other self. So, at first there is not a sense of self and not self, but only of self and other self. Myself seeming to be slightly different. He is using the word self and not self. Now he is using the word other self. So it is not self, but other self.
So it's not so negative.
Yeah, that's right. When it becomes not self, then it is more negative. Okay. A certain knowledge of identity and by identity is still there, but it tends to be first overstructured, then submerged, and then so replaced by knowledge through interchange and contact that it figures as a secondary awareness, as if it were a result and no longer the cause of the mutual contact. So, knowledge by identity at a slightly lower level, when you come even more down, the sense of unity is still lingering. The sense of oneness is still lingering, but it's beginning to become, it is fading away, and you start seeing the other as not me, not self. It is not yet not self. It is me but separate from me. Grades. He's talking of the gradations. Okay? But only of self and other. A certain knowledge of identity and by identity is still there, but it tends to be first overstructured. The darkness is overstructuring the light. The darkness below is, the unity is light. The separation is darkness. So that is conquering the darkness, the light. Okay. But it tends to be first overstructured, then submerged. So the darkness is submerging the light. There are gradations, he is giving you gradations. Okay? So, and then so replaced by knowledge through interchange and contact that it figures as a secondary awareness. It's awareness, but of not the primary awareness, but secondary awareness. Made less. As if it were a result and no longer the cause of the mutual contact. The still pervasive and enveloping touch. The pervasive and enveloping touch is there, that's a cosmic consciousness. Okay? Myself, my consciousness is going everywhere else. And it is also, he is using two words, pervasive and enveloping. It envelops. When it is enveloping, everything in the physical world is part of me. That's enveloping. And penetrating is going into each thing separately. Enveloping touch. the interpenetrating intimacy of the separate selves. It's very difficult for us to understand, but between identity and separateness, there are many grades. That's what he's saying.
That's what's happening
Yeah.
here, yes.
Okay, so finally, identity disappears behind the veil, and there is the play of being with other beings, consciousness with other consciousness, and underlying identity is still there, but it is not experienced. Your body and my body is the same, your vital and my body is the same. It is there, but we don't see it because it is veiled over. It is not experienced. Its place is taken by direct seizing and penetrating contact, intermingling, interchange. It is by this interaction that a more or less intimate knowledge, mutual awareness or awareness of the object remains possible. There is no feeling of self meeting self. There is a mutuality. So, a feeling of self meeting self would be the second type of knowledge. The first type of knowledge is feeling of self, only self exists. But here, self meeting self is the second one. And the third one, no feeling of self meeting self. But there is a mutuality. There is not yet an entire separateness, a complete otherness and ignorance. This is the spiritual plane of or the intraconscient. This is what happens. Direct separative knowledge he is describing. All grades are possible. All what he is talking about is all the grades, different grades. The power of inclusion of the object in the consciousness of an enveloping awareness and knowledge is there. But it is the inclusion of a now externalized existence which has to be made an element of ourselves by an attained or recovered knowledge, by a dwelling of consciousness upon the object, a concentration, a taking possession of it as part of the existence. This is quite a common experience. The cosmic consciousness is not so. If you go to the spiritual plane of consciousness, you can have the cosmic consciousness. You need not necessarily have it, but you can have it. Everything is part of me, and I am part of everybody else. This is a cosmic consciousness. The power of penetration is there, but it has no natural pervasiveness and does not lead to identity. It gathers what it can, takes what is thus acquired, and carries the contents of the object of knowledge to the subject. There can still be a direct and penetrating contact of consciousness with consciousness, creating a vivid and intimate knowledge, but it is confined to the points or to the extent of the contact. So, he is giving many grades. Okay, so if you keep one thing in mind, it becomes very clear. There is a gradation. The gradation from absolute identity and only oneness. Only I exist, nothing else. My consciousness, and this is true of substance, consciousness, power, as well as bliss, ananda. So, only one. Then slightly lower down, a little sense of separation. A little more down, little more sense of separation. At the lowest level, total separation. That's the. I think more than that, it will be difficult for us to understand. Okay, so that's this fairly big para, but he's gone into great detail to explain all these things. So those who are at the level of the direct, they can have quite intimate knowledge of an object, or it need sometimes be hazy, or you can just get some parts of the knowledge. Gradations are there. Okay. This first separative ignorance is evidently still a play of knowledge, but of a limited separative knowledge, a play of divided being working upon a reality of underlying unity and arriving only at an imperfect result or outcome of the concealed oneness. He is still talking of the third one. Knowledge by direct but separative knowledge. The complete intrinsic awareness of identity and the act of knowledge by identity belong to the higher hemisphere of existence. This knowledge by direct contact is the main character of the highest supraphysical mental planes of consciousness. The highest supraphysical mental planes of consciousness, the higher mind onwards. Those to which our surface being is closed in by a wall of ignorance, in a diminished and more separative form, it's a property of the lesser supraphysical planes of mind. So, I'll finish the para. It is or can be an element in all that is supraphysical. It is the main instrumentation of our subliminal self, its central means of awareness. For the subliminal self or inner being is a projection from these higher planes to meet the subconscious, and it inherits the character of consciousness of its planes of origin, with which it is intimately associated and in touch by kinship. In our outer being, we are children of the inconscience. In our inner being makes us inheritors of the higher heights of mind and life and spirit. The more we open inwards, go inwards, live inwards, receive from within, the more we draw away from the subjection to our inconscient origin and move towards all which is now superconscient to our ignorance. So, your body-mind life belongs to the lower plane of consciousness. Your inner being and spirit belongs to the higher plane of consciousness. So, it depends at which level you are. The higher you go, the more knowledge you have and the more truth you are experiencing. As you keep coming down, it's the opposite. That's what he's saying. So, again, I'll just read a summary of this one. Okay? This knowledge by direct but separative cognition, third level, third type of knowledge. The fourth is totally indirect separative knowledge. This knowledge by direct but separative cognition still retains some trace of the identity. It is a region of divided being with an underlying base of unity that operates. This region is the subliminal and the spiritual mental planes above reason. The absolute knowledge by identity belongs to the highest planes of the higher hemisphere. In the lower planes of the spiritual regions, higher mind, illumined mind, intuitive mind, this direct separative cognition is the normal way of understanding. In the subliminal too, it is operative because the inner being is the projection of the spiritual planes in their descent towards the subconscious. Our outer being of body, life, mind is a development and coming out of the inconscient. The spiritual planes and the inner being belong more to the heights of the spirit. So the more we live within, inwards and upwards, we move away from ignorance towards a larger knowledge. So he's talking of supraphysical. Let's be very clear. Level 1 includes matter, life and mind. Above that is the spiritual planes of consciousness, which is called supraphysical planes of consciousness. And the third level is the supermind, which is even higher, and there is also power there available at the third level.
Good. Thank you, Ranga. Namaste. Very good session today.